Hello guys, welcome to my YouTube channel. Today we're going to be talking about pseudocodes and flowcharts. Basically, I want to show you how you can make use of an algorithm to write out your pseudocode and also represent your pseudocode using a flowchart. So before we get right to it, let's take a brief look at what we mean by pseudocodes and flowcharts. What is pseudocode? From our definition here, it says a pseudocode is an informal way of programming description that does not require any strict programming language syntax or underlying technology considerations. It is used for creating an outline or a rough draft of a program. Pseudocode summarizes a program's flow but excludes underlying details. System designers write pseudocodes to ensure that programmers understand the software project's requirements and align the code accordingly. So from this definition, what do we understand by pseudocode? A pseudocode is like an informal way of writing a program. It's like a wireframe for those of us that are designers. Before you build your website, you have to draft out a design of how you want your website to be, the functionalities of your website. That's basically what a pseudocode means. It's like a rough sketch of the program that you're about to embark on, a rough sketch of your program's flow. That is what a pseudocode means. So let's get right to what a flowchart means. A flowchart is a type of diagram that represents a workflow or process. A flowchart can also be defined as a diagrammatic representation of an algorithm, a step-by-step approach to solving a task. So, like I said, we're going to be talking about pseudocode, flowcharts, and algorithms. But from our definition here, it talked about diagrams, a diagrammatic representation of an algorithm. That is basically what a flowchart is. You don't write out codes normally using flowchart. As you can see from the name chart, you know that there's going to be some diagrammatic representation. So a flowchart makes use of diagrams to represent the step-by-step approach to your workflow. So let's get right to an algorithm. An algorithm is a procedure used for solving a problem or performing a computation. So basically, this is just the procedure that you're making use of, that you're approaching, is your approach to solving this problem. That is what an algorithm is. An approach, a procedure to solving a problem. So let's get right to our questions. We have our first question. It says develop an algorithm to calculate the sum of squares of given inputs of numbers. You're going to create a flowchart and a pseudocode. Develop an algorithm to calculate the sum of squares of given inputs of numbers. So let's get right to it. We're developing an algorithm that will calculate the sum of squares of certain numbers. The first thing you want to do is to enter your start command. Then followed by, remember, we're calculating the sum of squares of given inputs of numbers. So enter our command inputs. Then we're going to enter this command, read our num1. As we're going to read our first input, that is called num1, and we'll assign a value to our num1 of x. Our num1 will be x. Then we're going to read num2, assign this value y. Then we're going to initialize our square roots. We want our square roots to and we'll initialize our square. Remember, we're calculating the sum of squares of given inputs of numbers. So we'll initialize our square. Then we want our square to have this value. Then we'll set our next command, will set our sum. Our sum will have this value. So the next thing we want to do now, it says calculate the sum of squares of given inputs of numbers. So we have our first input, we have our second input, then we have our square, and we have our sum. So the next thing we want to do is, once all this is done, we have to init our results, initialize that, then we go ahead and compute our values, which will be our first value, our first input here, which is x, our second input y. So remember, num1 is holding x and num2 is holding y. So we'll go ahead and enter this command, num1 square sum num2 square, and close our bracket. And this will give us our result. So after that, we'll go ahead and print results. And then end. So basically, this is our command. This is our pseudocode. Our pseudocode is done already. As you can see, they said calculate the sum of squares of given inputs of numbers. We started with our first command, start. Remember, when you're writing your pseudocode, you have to you need to have this start and end, so that the person that, if anybody sees your code, you know, okay, so this was is starting from and this way is ending. So we have our start, then our input, then we'll read our inputs. Num1, we gave it a value of x, num2 gave it a value of y, and we initialize our square root, and we set our sum and initialize results and the rest. So let's go ahead and take a look at our flowchart. I'm not going to do the flowchart here, but you can look up draw.io. You can draw different flowchart diagrams. Then you can just look up draw.io. It's it will be very helpful for you when you're trying to get your flowchart done. So let's go ahead and take a look at our flowchart. Okay, so as you can see, we have our start and our input. We're inputting a set of numbers. Then we're going to read num1 equals x, assigning this, you're storing x inside num1. Then you have num2 equals y, storing y inside num2. Then both of them will come up here where you initialize your square and set your sum, initialize results, then compute, and then print, and then you're done. So that is that about the first question. So let's go ahead and head over to the second question. The second question says, develop an algorithm. Develop an algorithm that reads in 3 numbers and write them all in sorted order. You are going to create a flowchart and pseudocode. So they said we should develop an algorithm that reads in 3 numbers, that reads in threes, and writes them all in sorted order. So the first thing you want to do, remember your start. Then we're going to go ahead and enter our input command. Input random numbers. Remember, they didn't specify any numbers, so we're inputting random numbers now. And we're going to read num1, num2, num3, which will give you this 1, 2, 3. Okay, let's not forget our double quotes. It's not actually a must, but I actually prefer using double quotes anytime I'm making use of these brackets. So what we are doing here in essence is num1, we are storing each of these values inside num1, num2, num3. We're storing 1, 2, 3 inside num1, num2, num3. So the next step we're going to take, they said an algorithm that reads in 3 numbers and writes them all out in sorted order. So the next thing you want to do is you're going to set your sorts to random. Set sorts to random. And the next thing you're going to do is repeat num1, num2, num3 in random order. And you enter this command next until 1, 2, and 3. Are sorted. So this is where you can end your command. As you can see, it's not very hard. It's not something that is very hard. They said develop an algorithm that reads in 3 numbers and writes them all in sorted order. So we have our start command, then we input random numbers, then we assign our values, we assign them to these variables, then we set our sorts to random. Then it's going to keep reading random numbers until they are all sorted. So it's going to keep picking these random numbers until it is sorted. Then you end your pseudocode. Let's go ahead and look at our flowcharts. Let's look at what the flowchart looks like. So we have our stats and we have our input, that is you're inputting random numbers, and we have our read, you're reading from num1 to num3, num1, num2, num3, and we have our sorts, you're sorting them randomly. Then this is where you compute, repeat num1 to num3 in random order, then you end. So that's it about that question. So the next question says, develop an algorithm to calculate a running sum a user will enter numbers that will be added to the sum, and when a negative number is encountered, stop adding numbers and write out the final results. Okay, this one is easy as well. So they said calculate a running sum. They said a user will enter numbers that will be added to the sum, and when a negative number is encountered, the program should stop adding numbers and print out the final result. So remember, the first thing you want to start with is your start command. Then your next command should be input. You're going to prompt user to enter numbers. Then you're going to set numbers. Numbers will be equal to, okay, let's say x1. Since we don't know they didn't give us a specific amount of numbers to work with, so we're going to make use of this x1 to xn, since we don't know the numbers we're working with. Then you're going to set your sum. Set sum. Sum equals num1. And we're going to store our results inside here. Results will be equal to results. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is, after we've prompted the user to input numbers, then we're going to set our numbers, set our sum, then store our results inside this results variable. Then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and compute our x1. Okay, x1 to xn. Yeah. As num1. This will be equal to results. So this is where we bring in our if-else statements, like in JavaScript. In pseudocode, there's something like if, then, and else. So we'll bring in our if-else statements. We say if x1, xn gives us a negative number, if x1, xn gives us a negative number, remember something very important. Whenever you're writing your pseudocode, it's very advisable for you to indent, especially if you're using your if, then, else statements. Always try your best to indent to make your code easier to read. So if x1 to xn equals a negative number, if while printing, or if while setting numbers it comes across a negative number, then we're going to stop and print. We're going to stop and print results. If x1 to xn, if it stumbles upon a negative number, we'll stop and then we print our results. Else computes. And then this will end our command. So that is that for that question. They said a user will enter numbers that will be added to the sum. We have our inputs, and then we have our sum. When we compute our users' numbers, our users' inputs will be added to the sum, and then it's going to give us our results. Then we come to our if, then, and else statements. We say if our user's input is a negative number, we're going to stop and print results. Else, we'll keep computing. Very simple. So that is that. Let's go ahead and take a look at the flowchart for that. As you can see, we have our stats, our inputs. You enter your numbers, then set sum number 1, then we'll set our results, then set numbers, then compute. If user input stumbles upon a negative number, if user input stumbles upon a negative number, true, print results. If it doesn't stumble upon a negative number, keep computing. So that is that about flowcharts and pseudocodes. I hope you guys found this video helpful. Please like and hit the subscribe button. Thank you very much. Till next time.